In 2019, the book titled Codename Lise, written by Larry Loftus, was released. Codename Lise tells the true story of the woman who became the most highly decorated spy in World War II. Odette Sansom was a French woman who married a British man. They moved to London in 1931 and had 3 daughters. Odette spent her days being a typical British housewife. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and in September of that year, Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared war on Germany. Like dominoes, other countries declared war on others, and World War II officially began. Fast forward 6 years, it's 1942, and the United States had joined the war, and the Allies began making plans to invade France. The British Special Executive, commonly referred to as the SOE, issued a request to the public asking for any pictures they might have of the French coastline. Odette was raised in France and had kept some pictures. She decided to send them to the SOE, but she got the address wrong and sent them to the War Office instead. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and in September of that year, Prime Minister Winston Churchill declared war on Germany. Like dominoes, other countries declared war on others, and World War II officially began. Fast forward 4 years, it's 1942, and the United States has joined the war, and the Allies began making plans to invade France. The British Special Executive, commonly referred to as the SOE, issued a request to the public asking for any pictures they might have of the French coastline. Odette was raised in France and had kept some pictures. She decided to send them to the SOE, but she got the address wrong and sent them to the War Office instead. The War Office investigated Odette's background, and considering her language skills and familiarity with the country, they decided that she could make a good spy. In July 1942, Odette was contacted by the SOE and invited to join SOE's spy training school. Odette accepted and completed her training in November. Odette's first assignment was to travel to the Burgundy region of France and open a safe house for British spies, downed airmen, and other allies or resistance fighters needing assistance. Upon her arrival, Odette became stranded and was unable to complete her trip to Burgundy. She was, however, able to contact the local Spindle spy ring and ended up working with them in southern France. Spindle was run by an SOE agent named Peter Churchill. His name is important. Odette acted as a courier, helped guide in Allied planes, and escorted downed airmen to safe houses. 4 months after she arrived, Germany invaded southern France. The military intelligence branch was led by Sergeant Hugo Bleicher, one of the most famous spy catchers, and he began hunting down the Spindle spy ring. A few fellow agents were captured, so Odette and Peter moved their headquarters to a hotel in the French Alps. In the end, Bleicher managed to use a captured agent to infiltrate the Spindle circuit, but Odette was suspicious. Peter was the leader of the spy circuit and had the authority to capture Bleicher, but Peter had traveled to England. Odette decided to wait until Peter returned to deal with Bleicher. Several months later, Peter returned to their headquarters, and on that same day, Bleicher arrived at the hotel and arrested both Odette and Peter. They were eventually transported to Paris and then tortured by German military police and the SS. Neither Odette or Peter ever talked or confessed to anything, and they were placed in solitary confinement. During her interrogation, Odette convinced the Germans that 1. Peter was related to the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and 2. that she was married to Peter. This made them the potential relatives of the British Prime Minister and very important prisoners. Odette and Peter were eventually tried and found guilty of spy activities and sentenced to death. In October 1943, Odette had become ill in prison and was moved to a communal cell with other women, including some former spies. Odette's health improved and she became known for making straw dolls. Odette had not seen Peter in months and assumed that he had been executed. In May 1944, Odette and several other female spies were transported east to various concentration camps. 4 would eventually die from lethal injections and 3 were shot. In July 1944, Odette arrived at the Ravensbrück concentration camp. The camp was located about 50 miles from Berlin, Germany. It was in a rural area alongside a lake that the cremated remains of its prisoners were dumped into. There were very little records found after the camp was liberated, but it is estimated that 132,000 prisoners were held in Ravensbrück, and 92,000 died from starvation, executions, or weakness. Odette was again placed in solitary confinement with very little food and no heat. 1 month later, Allied troops invaded France and headed east toward Germany. By December, Allied troops were almost to Berlin, the Americans from the west and the Russians from the east. The camp commandant, Prince Surin, thought Odette was the relative of the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Surin moved Odette to a warmer cell next to the camp ovens, but the camp doctor still predicted that Odette would not last very much longer. In May 1945, the Allied troops were almost in Berlin, and the commandant decided to try and use Odette to save himself. So he loaded Odette into a camp car, drove to the Allied lines, and surrendered. It didn't work. Surin was eventually tried and executed for war crimes. 1 week later, Odette was transported back to London, where she was reunited with Peter Churchill. Odette returned to her life as a housewife and married Peter Churchill in 1947. After the war, Odette received 7 medals from Great Britain and 1 medal from France for her work with the French resistance. The number of medals made Odette the most highly decorated spy and female spy in World War II. Odette died in 1995 and is buried in Surrey, England. In 2012, the British Royal Mail issued a postage stamp featuring Odette's portrait as a Briton of distinction.